New details on the mass shooting we first told you about at 6. 6 people are dead, including a 7-year-old, after a shooting rampage across the county Friday night. The shooting suspect is now behind bars. Sheriff Eddie Scott has identified the suspect as 24-year-old Derek Moore. Investigators say shootings began 7 p.m. at a David Hill Road home where Moore killed 3 relatives. Moore allegedly shot and killed his father, Glenn Moore, Uncle Willie Gines, and brother Quentin Moore. Derek Moore then stole his brother's pickup truck and went to a home on Blake Road and killed 7-year-old Michaela Gines. Later, 2 more victims were found on Siloam Griffith Road. Moore was eventually captured nearby and booked on a first-degree murder charge. His charges are expected to be upgraded. A preliminary hearing is set for Monday.